you know. Hello, everyone. My name is Arnie Guess, and I am your moderator today for panel number 6, Rewriting the Rules, Smart Design Standards. And I am the president and publisher of a website for the construction building industry, and it's called Construction Links Network. And I am looking forward to being your moderator this afternoon. I wanted to thank everyone for coming out, and sorry if I gotta read my notes a little bit here, but that's the way it has to be. And this webinar is being recorded, so everyone knows. Just some people can't make it, and they can come in and view later, like you can as well. So, and we'll be taking some questions at the end of the webinar of the session here today. And just if you have any questions, just tap the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen there and type away, and we'll reserve 10 minutes to go over some questions at the end of this session. So now I'd like to introduce our panelists, and we'll have Glen go first. Glen?
Sure, thanks, Arnie. So firstly, thank you to everybody for attending today, especially for those of you who've been following along all day. You finally got to the part where we get to find out if they left the best for last. So we'll see how that goes. So my name is Glen Meerland. I'm the Director of Data and Technology at Eddy Solutions. I've been with the company for about 2 years now. And I direct the product development, which includes our existing suite of products, as well as bringing on new and innovative products into the lineup. I also head up the data analytics team here, which is responsible for reporting, analytics, and all things data. Prior to this, I was in engineering consulting, working on building operational analytics, as well as sub-meter cost allocation for large commercial clients. And then prior to that, I spent the better half of a decade working in forensic engineering, where I investigated losses for primarily insurance clients. And that included mechanical failures, fire investigations, as well as equipment loss arising from those claims. I'm very excited to be here today discussing IoT with everyone.
Okay, Kevin, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kevin Furlow. I am a construction risk engineer for AXA XL Insurance, a division of AXA. I've been with AXA for about 5 years, and my focus is on the builder's risk or construction property business line. Prior to AXA, I was with Zurich for 7 years, and before that, I was in the School of Hard Knocks, otherwise known as the construction industry. So I was in construction for 27 years and helped keep people like Glenn busy investigating losses. So.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. And Abhishek, go ahead, introduce yourself, please.
Hi, everyone. My name is Abhishek. I work at Smith & Anderson. I lead their analytics, BAS, and integration part of the business. A lot of my job is kind of working with various other systems, a diverse set of systems, getting them to talk to each other, getting them to work with each other efficiently, and make them more valuable as a system together than individually.
Thank you. So I wanted to welcome everyone that's joining us here today. It's a different world, certainly. Everyone's virtually. I am personally in -10 Alberta here near Calgary. And if anyone wants some snow, I'll send it your way. I'd like to, before I start asking our questions to the panelists, just once again, we will be having a Q&A session at the end. And just, again, click and put your questions in there to the guys, and I'll read them out after, okay? So now let's start with the first question. Abhishek, this one's for you. How was the development of IoT reframe design infrastructure in the property space?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the main thing it's done is really encourage this industry to adapt change at a rate much faster than it's ever adapted anything before. This industry prior to IoT had a few set of protocols, maybe like BACnet or Modbus that it talked with. Now there's a whole new set of protocols coming in, like REST API, MQTT, and similarly, there's only a few networks it worked with, such as IP or MSTP, and now it's getting exposure to these other networks, such as LPWAN and LoRa. And what's happening is that these protocols and networks have been developed very sufficiently outside this industry. And now we are getting this huge influx of exposure to these ideas, right? And these new ways of doing things. And we're adapting to it. This industry is adapting to it, and it's adapting well. And it's only going to get more and more efficient with how it adapts to it. And when the process of doing this, it's having some bumps, but it's taking care of that too. A very good example is every time you're talking between protocols or talking between networks, you have to translate these languages, and you have something called a gateway to do that. Now, gateways are good for this, but they also have their negative effects, like they are more prone to failure. They're a point of failure, another point of failure. They're another point of cybersecurity issues. So it's coming along. But like I said, the industry is adapting to it. All these systems are talking to each other. So that means they can start converging with each other. What this basically means is at one point, this industry had various building systems on their own siloed networks, right? So you would have the lighting on its own, the BS, building automation system on its own, sitting on a computer you probably bought from Radio Shack or something like that. So it wasn't something that was really industrial grade. And now that everything's converging, it's becoming financially possible to put in an industrial grade network, an industrial grade server to host all of the systems, and most importantly, an industrial grade cybersecurity plan to keep all the data secure. So you can see how the industry is adapting to compensate for some lapses in other ways. And that's really the main point of how quickly it's learning to adapt. And this happened very recently. There's the hardware side, there's the software side, there's also the data side, right? Now all this data is becoming available. All this data before was locked away in its own individual silo. And you can share the data. Now the data is available at a moment's notice. You can know how a building's one particular room in the corner of the building performed over the last 2 years instantaneously. And this data is very useful to generate awareness among the public too. You know, there's a huge push for reducing greenhouse gases. There's a huge push for reducing energy. And with IoT coming in and basically proving that data is accessible at a very cost-effective method, you can share this with other people. And within the organization, you could share it, and everyone within an organization will have different applications for this data. But also, you can share it with the general public. Imagine you're sitting in your floor, and you know that your floor is 20% more efficient than the floor below you because you have this interactive screen that lets you compare your energy consumption to someone else's. And you know that kind of helps set a mindset. It helps that way of looking at the same problem in a different way. I always like to bring up the example of how the hotel business put in these signs that said, reuse your towels, right? To save energy on heating the water and heating distribution of the water. And the results from those are immense. So why not bring that idea back to our industry and show and present that data in meaningful, interactive, fun ways to people and see what the results are. And I'm pretty sure it'll be a good result. And all of these are only possible because of how accessible everything has become due to IoT and the sensors and how the systems work together. So yeah, this industry is adapting to a very radical change. And that change, I think, has been brought a long way because of IoT and what it has provided to us.
Okay, thank you very much. Glen or Kevin, do you have anything to add to this?
Not much. That was a really great answer. Abhishek brought up a lot of really good points there. All I would say is, yeah, it's almost like the maturity of the industry as it develops has just enabled all these knock-on effects, and you get this inflection point where it just adds more and more value as more people get online. So I think that's sort of where we are now.
Kevin, anything to add? No?
Yep.
Nope.
No, I would just add that, like Abhishek pointed out, the industry has responded probably faster than it would like to. And I know, the distance or the separation between design and construction has gotten shorter because the contractor has to understand what all these sensors are going to do. It's a whole nother level of infrastructure that has to be installed in the building while it's being constructed. And kind of going back up the chain, the design team needs to understand what data can be collected, what data the owner wants to collect, and make sure the correct sensors and devices are installed to go with that program. So it's been it's been a lot of change in a short period of time. But I think we're seeing that the integration of technology is being accomplished, and it is helping us.
Yeah, and Kevin brought up a good point. How construction is affected by this is also immense too, because you have now various people working together, whereas before they would have not, right? Because of all the integration. So how that gets figured out is a big part of the process and the change. And it's something that's new, but that's something that is being adapted very, very positively, I feel, in my experience so far.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, guys. We should move on to question number 2 now. How has the proliferation of the startup PropTech put pressure on industries such as engineering and insurance? We'll start off with Kevin, and maybe Abhishek can answer after that. Go ahead, guys.
Okay, thanks, Arnie. That's a very good question. I think it kind of dovetails with the first one. I know from the insurance standpoint, or our perspective, we've been trying to keep up with all of the technologies that are coming out and that are available. So the startups and the PropTech is influencing the ConTech and the InsurTech. All three of those kind of overlap and weave together. One of the things that we've done at AXA is put together what we're calling our ecosystem, which is a curated set of technologies that we believe will help our customers reduce the risk of loss. And so we're negotiating with the tech companies. We're kind of creating a tech library so that our insureds have access to the marketing sheets and can kind of sort through what's available, because it is rather daunting to keep up with all of the tech that's coming out. And there's some very exciting and specific technologies that we believe help us with different lines of business. There's certainly quite a few technologies that have come out for safety and primary casualty, including electrocution prevention. And with COVID, some of those vendors pivoted to provide contact or employee separation and contact tracing information, being able to collect that data. on the builder's risk side of the house that I'm part of, technologies like Eddy Solutions are huge because the ability to monitor water flow and shut water off when it should not be flowing is a key piece of technology that will help us reduce water damage losses. So I think there is some pressure exerted just by the sheer number of solutions that are available, and it's important for users to kind of sort through all of that and put the due diligence in to make sure they're getting the right solution for their condition.
Okay, thank you. Abhishek, anything to quickly add before we move on to the next question?
No, everything, what Kevin was saying was really raising a lot of good points. Technology is moving fast, and it's proving that it can reduce risk. And it's showing this over and over again.
Yes.
It's showing this at a very cost-effective way, and both in terms of supply and install. And it's, once again, changing the mindset at a very rapid rate. And I'm glad to hear that everyone's adapting to it and everyone's realizing the benefit of it right away.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to move on to question number 3, everyone. And this, I think we're going to start with Glen on this one. Glen, so let's talk about smart cities. How do you see the design industry evolving on a macro level to consider this growth?
Great, thanks, Arnie. So there's certainly a lot of opportunities to be had with smart cities. There's, as we've already heard, a lot of benefits in terms of the efficiencies, the risk reduction, and as we just heard, cost savings too. Like, it can be done economically. So a lot of benefits that can come about from smart cities. So with respect to your question, a few ideas come to mind. I think standardization plays a very important role here. Nobody wants to be the first one to jump on a technology that doesn't end up being the one that wins at the end of the day, for obvious reasons, I think. However, as the technologies become more standardized, then you start to see people jump on board, and then you get the network effect. So once it becomes established, that's when more and more companies adopt the technology, and it begins to foster an entire ecosystem around these technologies, and it just multiplies on itself. Secondly, I think security is going to play a really critical role in smart cities. So obviously there's compliance considerations for any data that you're going to have in transit or at rest. And IoT has definitely got some bad headlines in the past related to this. But if you look back at the early days of the internet, traffic was largely unencrypted. And nowadays, most of us don't think twice about having our credit card stored in Chrome and then passing that off to Amazon. It's really the maturity of the security that has enabled that. So I see this as very much a solvable problem. I think mostly solved today. Finally, something that we see as one of the biggest issues in the overall adoption of smart city design is connectivity, particularly in buildings, which is something that we deal with heavily at Eddy. So if you look at a building, it's full of concrete, rebar, equipment, all sorts of high interference objects, and each of these can interfere with your signal strength. So at Eddy, we use LoRaWAN, which is a low power wide area network. You might have heard about it in other discussions today. And we find that it does really well in these high interference environments. So connectivity is an area where advances in hardware and protocols has enabled these technologies that might not previously have been possible. And I definitely expect that trend to continue into the future, where as the technologies mature, it just takes off.
Okay, thank you, Glen. Abhishek, as our resident design engineer, I'm sure you have a little bit of wisdom to add to this.
Yeah, so I'm glad Glen brought up LoRaWAN. And these kind of protocols, what's so powerful about these protocols, is the distance they can travel. So your Wi-Fi, your typical wireless signals right now, like for Wi-Fi, Zigbee, I don't know if you've heard of these, are maybe in the range of 10 meters, right? 10, 15 meters. LoRaWAN, LPWAN, these kind of protocols can travel 10, 20 kilometers, much further. So you can imagine how much presence of the sensors that's possible, because you put off one antenna, right? Then you can start imagining how much data you can start getting from these. And so far we're talking about within the building, but why not in the irrigation fields? Why not in the roads? Why not in the sidewalks, right? All these things where running a cable might be expensive, running wires might be expensive. You can pick it up wirelessly, and it's effective, it's powerful, and it gives you eyes where you thought you never would have eyes before. So it's a good time for IoT to be implemented, because there's technologies that enable it to become cost effective and very helpful in how you diagnose and approach problems.
Okay, thank you, Abhishek. So now we're going to move on to question number 4. How will organizations remain connected moving forward? And Kevin, could you address to begin this one, please?
Well, I think the points that Glen and Abhishek just made about the new protocols and the advances in hardware will play a critical role in keeping that connectivity, especially when you think about the conditions we're in today, where people are working remotely and having to participate in conferences via Zoom. The connectivity issues are, if you can't connect, you're definitely going to be at a disadvantage. So I think we're going to see companies invest more in their infrastructure and making sure that their employees can be connected wherever they are.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. Anyone else want to add to that at all?
I think Kevin basically took the words right out of my mouth. So through COVID, I think everybody's being forced to adapt, whether they like it or not. There's definitely, there's always been a trend towards working in sort of a distributed environment on the organizational side, and developing a maturity around that's sort of been forced on a lot of organizations. But then I'd also add that through IoT, you basically have eyes and ears on the job site at all times. So it's actually making us more connected than ever. So while we're working in a more distributed manner, we're actually very much more connected, I feel, through the use of IoT.
And I can attest, living in a smaller town, like our internet is very slow compared to what I'd get in Calgary, for instance. So, there's talk about getting lots of internet throughout, right across the country in remote areas. And I've been reading about some really neat technologies out there. So that's going to help a guy like me, that's for sure, especially someone that runs a website for a business. So we're going to move on to question number 5 now. I'd like to know what our speakers think about the penetration and impact of technology in the construction space, contractors and insurance. Glen, would you like to start this one, please?
Sure. So hopefully I'm not hurting any feelings if I suggest that maybe the construction industry is sometimes being considered a slow-moving space when it comes to technology adoption. But I think we're seeing a big shift, and actually Abhishek alluded to this in his first answer, that we're definitely seeing a huge shift going on here. So if we look at water damage, which is Eddie's specialty, in the construction world, this is a massive problem for builders as well as insurers. A simple little leak can cause expensive project delays, damage to the building and contents, and it might even cause some major losses in terms of the expensive equipment that gets damaged in the process. I don't think there's any construction company that hasn't had quite a bit of money lost due to damage and delays. But we're seeing a big shift with our work with PCL, who they've embraced technology, for example, using sensors for tracking concrete temperatures, as well as, of course, our work with them looking at water issues through our sensors and metering devices. And insurance carriers, we found, are definitely encouraging the use of connected technology, and we're seeing a lot of more help on this side, which I think is something Kevin could probably expand upon.
Yeah, for sure, Glen. It's a couple of years ago, my boss kind of challenged me to to investigate our claims data and figure out where what was causing the majority of our losses, what were our big loss leaders. And in going all the way back to the inception of the construction unit in 2010 at AXA, what I found was that water damage was the leading cause of loss by both frequency and severity. And it's kind of like a death by 1,000 cuts, because there's projects where they don't just have one leak, they have several leaks. And usually the leaks occur later in the project when there's more material being installed, so the losses can grow rapidly. So the use of the technology like Eddy Solutions offers is a huge game changer for us. And my feelings weren't hurt at all by what you said. Construction has always been slow to embrace change. I think in the last probably 5 years, more contractors are now looking into technology and how that can help them complete work more efficiently, complete work more safely, and complete work without losses. They've realized, and the insurers have kind of been forced into the corner of having to charge more in rate as well as increase deductibles, because as contractors get more skin in the game, they pay more attention to the issues. So especially with water damage, we've seen that with the advent of higher deductibles for water losses, they're coming and asking us, how can we prevent these from happening? So I think the impact of the Internet of Things on construction, we're just tapping into it. I think there's a lot more to come. And I think, in combination with some of the things that happened 10 years ago in the design side with modeling and BIM, those technologies are now standard. They're like table stakes. If you're not modeling, you're kind of behind the times. And I think the same is going to be true with some of the other technologies we're seeing.
Okay, anything else on that for that question, guys?
I'd like to add, an important part of construction is the phase between construction finishing and handover. And that phase often is plagued with problems, right? Users don't have the time, haven't been trained fully yet, or various issues arise. And if we have the data from before over a long period of time, that really helps that whole transition happen much more smoothly. So I think that part is a very important part of how IoT sensors during construction can definitely help new clients get accommodated to their new environment and learn how to use their building to what it's designed for, right, much quicker than before.
Yeah, Abhishek, I agree. I think kind of tying on to the BIM modeling that's happening early in the design process, now we're also seeing the digital twin or the as-built model being available for the building owner, so they can see, not only do they have plans and paper, but they can see the digital model of what's been built. Yeah. So they can figure out how to use it.
Okay, thanks guys. And we're gonna move on to our last question, but before we do, I just want to remind everyone, we're gonna have a Q&A after this last question and discussion. And all you gotta do is just type in your question at the bottom, and we will be answering that at the end here in 10-15 minutes or so, okay? So moving on, I think we'd like all the speakers here to answer this one, please. What is your best advice from a design perspective? Let's start with Abhishek. You go ahead first, please.
Yeah, okay. I think the way I would answer it is there's two categories. One is, are you designing for something that is going to go into construction and finish construction 5 years from now? If that's the case, then you should probably, regardless of how over the top these IoT sensors may be, regardless of how over the top the use cases may be, embrace it. I think it's very important to realize that in 5 years from now, 6 years from now, these will be all expected from buildings. This kind of data, this kind of visualization of in a 3D model, what's happening, right? So approach it with that attitude. And if you can't do it after you've explored it a bit, or it doesn't make sense, then back off. But definitely consider it and look into it. But if you're looking at a portfolio of buildings that's already existing, then bringing that to an IoT kind of expectation that we're talking about is much more difficult. So instead of going and approaching individual buildings, create a portfolio-wide strategy. Look at where you want to be 5 years from now, 6 years from now, then work backwards in terms of how much budgets you have every year, and develop a strategy of implementing systems that can be upgraded over time, that can be integrated with other systems over time, rather than just going in and installing something. Because the last thing you want is something that is not compatible, or is made redundant, or even worse, is not standardized. As I think Glenn mentioned much earlier in this talk, standardization is a very important aspect of IoT. With all this data coming in, with all these naming conventions, with all this, how often the data is coming in. You want to standardize everything, down to whose role it is in your organization to view a certain aspect of your building. So standardization is very important, both in the short term and the long term.
Okay, thank you. Kevin, did you want to go next on that?
Well, I just would echo what Abhishek said, especially when you're looking at a portfolio of buildings or properties. Having a consistent approach will help you avoid the situation of one building has type A sensors and the rest of the buildings have type D sensors, and they don't, the data doesn't integrate. You end up kind of shooting yourself in the foot. So having that, taking the time is probably the better way to say it, taking the time to develop a consistent approach and a standardized use of sensors and data collection will be more productive and helpful in the long run.
Okay, Glenn, do you have anything to add?
Sure. I think it's going to be a lot of echoing what Abhishek and Kevin just said. But definitely, I would say if I was to give some advice, it'd be choose your technologies carefully. So definitely look at what will provide connectivity that's sufficient for your application. So Abhishek talked about the limitations of a lot of the protocols, and at Eddy we use LoRaWAN, and we find that works very well. But you don't want to get a solution that doesn't work at the end of the day. So put a lot of thought into that. And then Abhishek hammered standardization, which I think is great. It's the standardization that makes everybody get on board. So it's such a critical component of making it take off. I'd also say pay attention to security. It's an ever increasing thing to be, you should already be paying attention to it, and you should continue to pay attention to it more and more, and you'll have to pay attention to it more and more. And then I would also say, so on the organizational side, put a lot of thought into how IoT actually fits into your overall organization and objectives. So all too often we hear stats like, X number of organizations plan to implement Y, but only X% have a plan to do it. Don't just shoot in the dark just because everybody else is doing it. Put some thought and get a champion internally who will make sure that it actually, that you realize the benefits that you're trying to achieve. That's as important as doing it, is making sure you can actually realize those benefits and you're not just throwing data into the ether and not looking at it. And then the final bit of advice I'd say is just don't get left behind. The trend is very clear. Things are moving towards smart cities and IoT. So don't sit around waiting forever.
Okay, anything else, guys, to add to that? before we-
Yeah, I would just like to highlight one thing Glenn just said, which I think is critical, and that is to define the benefits you're looking for. If you're a property owner, maybe you're trying to reduce water usage, or maybe you're trying to reduce energy usage. So kind of drilling down on those things and getting to a, specific is always better because then it's more measurable and it's more achievable. So if you're trying to reduce energy consumption, being able to measure and maybe have sensors that measure and report on kilowatt hours per day or per hour of usage will help you achieve the goal you're trying to reach. But you can't get anywhere if you don't know what you're aiming for.
Yeah.
So
Technology is just the means
yes.
to help you achieve your goal. Don't install technology for the sake of installing technology.
Yep.
Okay, thank you, you guys. I greatly appreciate your expertise, that's for sure. And it's been a pleasure being the moderator of this session. And before we conclude, we're going to answer some questions, but I wanted to remind everyone and I did it earlier this afternoon before this session. I went and visited all the exhibitors on the online exhibitors, and I submitted my business card. I checked out their LinkedIn page. I followed it. I followed their Twitter because I'm a big social media guy. And it's great to have them as our sponsors and partners for this important summit that we've had here today. So if you get a chance, please go do that. So we're going to move to some Q&A, and I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to do this, but I see one question in the chat. I think I'll start with this. And again, this one is for everybody. So here's the question. Has construction vibration issues and related impacts been identified as a challenge? We noticed that in the consistent measurement is really lacking in this area, but not sure if the operators are willing to discuss related IoT solutions. Kevin, that might be more up your alley on that one. I don't know.
Well, I think I have not heard of any issues with systems not reporting or not, data not being collected due to vibration issues. That's certainly a problem or a challenge early in the construction process. So I would say it's something to think about if you're installing sensors early in the process, either making sure the mounting is adequately braced or maybe provides cushioning to reduce the vibrations. But I think a lot of the sensors are going to be installed a little bit later in construction after most of the structural work is done. So hopefully those vibrations would be lower. But I don't know, Glenn, you're more of the sensor technology guru, so.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any problems that have come up around that, same as you. But definitely, that's why you test things before you roll them out full scale. And we talked about the importance of having a portfolio-wide approach and thinking through how you do these things. But yeah, I'm not aware of any particular issues around that.
Okay, Abhishek, anything?
I think this also has a play in a bigger kind of question, is using sensors to be more proactive in seeing issues come up rather than reacting to issues that have already come up, right? So if we put in sensors that can see that this system is vibrating more today than it was last week, it's indicating that something's not right. And if you're on construction in the zone, it's hard to notice incremental deficiencies, right? You only notice it until a point of no return or a point where it's going to cost a lot to fix. So to keep, to have sensors that can tell you that something is changing its behavior, probably for not the best reasons over time, is a very valuable data set. And more and more of such implementation should be encouraged in any kind of construction zone.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to move on to another question from the attendees. A lot of the terms people use are quite fluid when it comes to definitions. What do you think defines a smart city or a smartly designed building? Again, open-ended for whoever wants to go first.
I would say a smart city or a smartly designed building means, have you thought through how your technology is going to be used? Have you thought through what you want, what your client wants, what your organization wants, and then delivered that through technology? If I go into a building and someone's just telling me, or if I go to a city and someone's just telling me, oh, I'm gathering 5-minute interval data on all my sensors, my question will be, okay, what are you using it for? Why is it beneficial? If they can answer me that, then I will know that it's smart in some sense. But if they can't, then I will be like, okay, so you've enabled your building to be smart. It's in the way. Now let's make it an intelligent building. Let's go from I have the data to I've used the data to improve my situation, right? That's when I would call it a smart building.
Okay, anyone else?
Yeah, I'll jump in there. Just I like this question because I think it points out that there really aren't good definitions established that are widely accepted, whether it's based on performance or which sensors and which types of data are being collected and how often it's being collected, and those kinds of objective performance data that could define smart building or smart city. I think partly because we're just rushing up on it, that there hasn't been an organization or a government entity that's defined those terms. So I would say just be careful using the terms and ask questions to make sure people understand the terms they're using.
Yeah, I'll just jump in quickly too. Like, I like this question too, because I think on the engineering side, we like our terms clearly defined. And what I was just kind of mulling over while Kevin and Abhishek were talking is, let's look at an analogy. What's a smartphone? Like it's the phone that everybody has. So you can almost look at it as a paradigm shift. So what's a smart building? Well, at some point, they're all going to be smart buildings. So it's not a where is it? It's a paradigm shift. A certain threshold where you're sort of moving into the future, and at this level now, now everything's a smart building.
Yeah, where it's obvious that what we had before was a totally lower category compared to what we have now, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting that we still call them smartphones. I don't know when we'll drop off the smart and just call them phones again.
Smarter phones.
Hey guys, we're down to our last 4 minutes and I can see 3 questions left. So we're gonna have to be quick. This one is for Abhishek. What's a recent example of a smart design solution that you saw being implemented and was that you're really impressed with? Example.
It's a good question. Well, a lot of using sensors within a space and to see, this was at a, what do you call, an older folks home where there's sensors everywhere to see if a person has fallen over or not, because the sensors is good enough to see the heartbeat of the person, how fast the person's breathing, and basically their orientation within the space. And the use case around this was that if there's a sudden exchange or a sudden change in height of a person's orientation or a person in a room, it probably implies that they fell over or something like that. So the use case was that if this is triggered by a sensor, an alarm shoots up immediately on the front end panel of the facility caretakers, right? And they can immediately rush over to the place and either help this person up or take the next actions that are required. So, and because of the age of the person, because of whatever physical disability the person has, they might not be able to react quickly enough, or they might not be able to call for help quickly enough, right? Or in just shock. So this use case was very valuable, I felt. And to see this implemented was, or go in that direction was a very impressive, I think, way of using smart sensors and using sensors to their full benefits.
Okay, thank you. And I think we got time for one more quick question here, and it's for Kevin. Kevin, this attendee wants to hear your thoughts on and what do insurers play in the process of influencing the adoption of IoT and risk mitigation technology on construction sites and operating environments? And what would you say the most prevalent risks are to address for municipalities, constructors and operators? As quick as you can, thanks.
Okay, very, very good questions, Glenn. I mean, Arnie, and good question to anonymous attendee. I think insurers play a couple of different roles, and I know from my own position within AXA XL, we are trying to lead our customers to the use of technology that we think will help reduce their risks. Because if they have lower risks, we can charge lower rates, and we all enjoy the benefits of fewer losses. So we're trying to kind of get on the front end of the wave, if you will, and lead the market. I think some insurers are probably taking a wait and see attitude to see which technologies provide the most benefit. But we're trying to suss that out on the front end and learn by doing. So I think the most prevalent risks to address, obviously primary casualty, the safety risks, is where a lot of this started. And there's quite a few technologies out there that address that risk. But there's also, kind of a strange one that we've seen that we are working with is a company called Document Crunch. It's an artificial intelligence engine that can review hundreds of pages of documents, and most contracts are running that length now, and help pick out the phrases that need the most attention. Like anytime the word indemnify is used, it highlights where that is, so you can go look at those. And that really helps with our subcontractor default insurance, as well as a couple of other lines, excess liability. On the builder's risk side, I've already mentioned Eddy Solutions, but we're also looking at some other photogrammetry solutions for project management to be able to look at progress and help with pay applications and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of construction has a lot of risks. So I think there's a lot of opportunities there. Hopefully that answered most of your question.
Okay, and just to remind any of the attendees, feel free to contact the hosts of the the summit, and we can always get your questions to these professionals. They can answer your questions. Just reach out to them. I'm sure we can connect you up with them. So that's it here for today, and I wanted to thank everyone for attending, and it sounds like it's been a fantastic day, and I really enjoyed this session and visiting the exhibitors, and wanted to thank everyone for coming out. And if you can hang on for a few more minutes, the organizers are going to be announcing the winner of an innovator pitch competition. So I know I'm probably not going to win, so I'm going to sign off. And thanks everyone, and have a great evening, and stay safe out there. Take care.
Thanks, Arnie.
Bye.
Thanks, Arnie, and thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Arnie.
Thank you.